Okay. Um, so yeah, tell us, Danny, about your experience.
Um, so a little about me. My name is Danny Alexandria. My experience is slightly similar to yours, but a little bit different. So when I first started school, I was in a private school, and I actually did JK, SK, and grade one all in 1 year. Um, then when we moved, I got put into public school, and they were like shocked that I skipped 2 grades. Because here in Ontario, we have this like cohort thing where basically the year that you're born in is just the people you stay with. They don't want you moving about. Um, but my mom kind of fought, and I only had to repeat grade one again. So I ended up being a year ahead. When I got to grade three, it's a bit of a blur because that is also the year that my aunt died suddenly, but that's kind of what got me into sick kids. And then I got diagnosed with all of like my learning disabilities and ended up actually being in a study for girls in ADHD because at the time they had only ever studied boys, and that's what all the criteria was based off of. So I was diagnosed with ADHD, depression, anxiety, um, and not dyslexia at the time, but that'll come back in a little bit later. Um, I still thrived in school, but according to my school, you cannot both have a learning disability and be gifted at the same time. So I was removed from the gifted program and put in spec ed. Um, I have a very divisive personality, so teachers either love me or they loathe me. There's absolutely no in between. So, all throughout my journey, there's teachers who have really, really fought for me, and that is why I am where I am to this day.
Mm.
Um, Fast forward to grade five and grade six, I was in French immersion, um, but my French teacher, Monsieur Daniel Priere, did not like me whatsoever. I will never forget the day that this man, like, okay, how do I explain this? Because I have ADHD, I fidget, I get up a lot, move around, that kind of stuff, and that's not very conducive to how they want kids to behave in a classroom. But that was me. Um, so one day, Monsieur Pierre got very frustrated with me, um, dashed all the stuff that was on my desk off my desk, and essentially started making fun of me in front of the entire class about how I couldn't sit still, how I couldn't pay attention, etc. This led to a lot of bullying. I remember a particular incident where some kids said that they brought a birthday present for me for my birthday for school, wouldn't let me open it until the end of the day. At the end of the day, when they let me open the present, it actually were eggs that they then proceeded to throw at me and drenched me in egg. Um, yeah, school was not fun for me. Um, I moved schools after that, went back to a private school. Still always did great academically, but struggled like socially and emotionally. My mom was always a really great advocate for what I deserved. When I went to high school, I had to choose between basically getting the spec ed help that I needed or going to an arts school. My mom chose the spec ed, which I think was the right choice, but I also really regret not being able to thrive in the arts, which is a whole other separate issue. In high school, same kind of issues. I thrive academically, but kind of flounder socially and emotionally. Um, I was lucky enough to have teachers who fought for me because what the trend is that if you have a learning disability, again, you apparently cannot be both gifted and have an LD. So I was lucky enough to be put in the academic stream, whereas most kids are put in what they called locally developed, which is essentially like, we don't think you're going to amount to anything. We're going to give you basic life skills and get you out of high school. Whereas for me, I was lucky enough to be in that academic stream and get to actually pursue and have the chance of going to post-secondary. Around grade 10, I actually started going to college as well because I'm an insane person. So I was taking a full course load in high school, going to college for sign language, and then also being in like 10 clubs and running 4 of them. I wish I had that same amount of energy that I had then now. But I got through high school. I actually was an Ontario Scholar, moving on to university. So I had some health issues in grade 12, which caused a lot of problems for me because even though I graduated as an Ontario Scholar, when my teachers were sending my grades for my midterms, because I had been away from school for a month, they, instead of putting like a no mark because I was away because I was sick, they put zeros. So then it looked like I was failing. So pretty much all of the schools that I applied for looked at my marks at the time and were like, absolutely not. It took a lot of work to even get into university and a lot of work for my principal to be like, oh my gosh, we made a mistake, and calling schools and trying to tell them that they made a mistake. So I ended up just going to Laurier for just like randomness. I hadn't really declared a major. My first year at Laurier was a pretty horrible experience, not because of anything that anyone did, but if anyone knows, Laurier 2014, between Laurier and UW, my first year, 8 kids died. And if, for people who don't know the geography of Canada, the university, Laurier University and the University of Waterloo are up the street from each other. Like you could walk between the 2 universities. So the schools are very close. So, and people like intermingle. So between those 2 schools, 8 kids died. And particularly for me, I had an incident where one of my high school friends who ended up at Laurier with me tried to take her own life. She didn't succeed, thankfully, but her parents basically came up to Waterloo, signed like medical decision making to freshly 18-year-old me, and went home. So that was a very traumatic experience, and by the end of it, I had a full mental breakdown my first year, didn't finish my second semester, and went home. I eventually transferred schools because I just didn't want to be in that environment anymore. And I'm not going to name that school because that school was hell on earth, and that's a different story for a different day. But I got in for music. This is very important. I have taken music lessons my whole life. I've done the whole Royal Conservatory of Music thing. I have several first-class honors with distinctions from the Royal Conservatory of Music. So objectively, I can music. When I get to this school, because of my learning disabilities, I cannot sight sing. What sight singing basically is they throw a piece of music in front of you that you've never seen before and expect you to just look at the notes and sing it. I'm dyslexic. I wasn't formally diagnosed with dyslexia because at the time, whatever the testing wasn't it, but what it would say on my forms was like ADHD with dyslexia-like symptoms. But now if you look at the same scoring, how they've modified it, I would be considered dyslexic. So when I look at a piece of brand new music, all I see is like the notes basically move on the staff. It all gets jumbled. I can't sight sing, but I can sing. I can do theory. I can do everything else. And generally how I accommodate myself in terms of music is I color code notes just so that there's a color and not just like all black so that it doesn't jump as much. The head of this department was not having it, basically called me stupid to the point where he would not allow me in his classes, and tried to like force me to have like a private tutor to teach me like basic grade 1 level piano because he thought I couldn't play piano because he kept trying to get me to sight read. But again, first class honors with distinction from the Royal Conservatory of Music. We had several meetings, all this kind of stuff to try and explain to him like learning disabilities. He wasn't having it. One of the requirements to graduate from your music degree there is you have to be in the choirs, and of course he ran the choirs. And to audition for the choirs, you need to sight sing. Couldn't sight sing. He refused to allow me into any of the choirs. So I would never have been able to graduate from that school, from that program. So I had to switch majors. So I switched from music to film. Film, I did well because I had better teachers who were more accommodating. And I do love film. Like I went on and studied film again later on in life, but music has always been my first love. And working with kids has always been my second love. Every job I've ever had is working with children. And I wanted to be a teacher. That was the goal. Finished my undergrad in 2018, and I was going to apply for teachers college. But 6 weeks before I finished my undergrad, I had a catastrophic injury. I tore my MCL, which has caused a bunch of other health issues, but teachers college didn't happen. But in that time when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, because I didn't even know if I was going to graduate, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to finish my exams, I realized that I didn't actually want to be a teacher. I wanted to work with kids, yes, but not be a teacher because I didn't want to be in the system. I was lucky enough to have teachers that fought for me, that really loved me and made sure that I was okay and that I was set up for success. But being in spec ed, I also saw all the kids that nobody cared about, in terms of like they just wrote them off, put them in locally developed, and basically affirmed to them that they could never be anything. And that's kind of the same feeling I had in grade 3 when I was taken out of the gifted program because I was diagnosed with a learning disability. Even though academically there was nothing wrong with my performance, I still scored everything that needed to be in gifted. But what that showed me was, in their mind, to have a learning disability is to mean you're stupid, and that's not true. But that is kind of what's driven me my whole life. That's why I was crazy enough to start college while still in high school. That's why I now have 3 degrees, because it's like the little voice trying to prove that, like, of course not. Like, you can be smart and have a learning disability. So that's kind of how I got to that. I've noticed that there is a lot of misinformation. A lot of the information that you can Google comes from the States. That's a problem in Canada. A lot of our information is very US centric, which is not helpful. I feel that the government
Or on Stats Canada, it's archived for the last 10 years.
Oh, that's fun. The government, learning services obviously has a budget, and that's fine. But in terms of law, you are entitled to your accommodations, you are entitled to your assessments, you are entitled to all of these things. But because they have a budget and because they consistently cut the budget, schools don't advocate for kids, really. The only people who get anything are either have kids because the teachers really love them and advocate for them, or have parents who are well informed enough to advocate for their children, which leaves a lot of people to slip through the cracks. And to me, that's not fair. And not even just fair in terms of like self-confidence or anything. It is the literal trajectory of your life. When you are diagnosed with a learning disability and you're going from grade 8 to high school, and your grade 8 teacher checks the box for you to go into academic, applied, or locally developed, that is literally the trajectory of your life. That is if you can go to university, go to college, or go to none. And that's where a lot of kids' dreams die, because to switch tracks is a whole other hullabaloo that most people don't want to go through. And I feel that if people had the resources, or if people were as lucky as me and had people who were advocating for them, they can accomplish some of the same things that I accomplished. I have never felt stupid. I know I'm not stupid, but that is a privilege in the world of having learning disabilities, which is really sad to say, but it's true. I have met so many people who didn't know what they were entitled to, didn't know assistive technology existed and didn't know that they could do it cut and dry. And that is where a lot of my passion comes from. I make a lot of content on my YouTube channel about my disabilities, my accessibility, my service dog, just because that's what I'm really passionate about. And that's me.
Oh my gosh, Danny, thank you so much for sharing that. There is so much in that story where I was just like, who are these teachers? Who are these people? And
I
then
will name names, don't you worry.
So much where I was just like, okay. But I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. And even though different experiences, similar, different experiences, but I think some points in our experience overlap and cross path. But it just shows me that this is why we need to be having these conversations. Like we have these conversations of a different side of learning, because there's people that still have these archaic perception of what learning disability is, of what neurodiversity is, right? There's people within certain community groups that don't even recognize that these things, I shouldn't say things, but they exist, right? And understanding what twice exceptional students are and all these different things. So it boils my blood that this happened to you, and it boils my blood. And I felt that when you said that there's kids in these classrooms that like just get overlooked and no one cares about, like no one's advocating for them, and it's the sad part, but it's a reality. I don't think it should be like, I think what it is that I'm realizing from everything that I've done too is that we need to, I call it like, take our head out of the sand, like, stopping the ostrich, like putting your head in the sand and trying to avoid certain things. We need to take our head out of the sand. Like, we know better. Like, what makes you think it's okay to talk to a student like that? Like, and I've heard you experience some things, I experienced some things, and then I've seen some things. And now that I'm on this side of the table helping other parents advocate for their child, when I hear the things, I am just like, why? Why would you even think it's okay to say something like that to an 8-year-old? Why do you think it's okay to say that to a student in university, right? Yeah. So it just really makes me think that, like, okay, as much as we think that we're advanced, we're not. We have a lot of work to do in this.
110%.
And this is why I'm all here for this. And like I said, this is why I'm like, I did Special Compass, because it's time that we open our eyes and stop pretending that, hey, everything is equal and equitable and we're all just one happy kumbaya family here. No, we're not. There's a lot of things that are going on, and the advocate in me is ready to be like, yo, knocking on some doors, talking to who I have to talk to. I've done it before, and I'm not afraid to do it again. We need to open our eyes and put better funding and better education and training into these conversations about inclusive education and, learning disabilities and everything like that. So
yeah,
thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, there's a lot of implicit bias. Like, a great example of that in our timeline right now. This episode's probably going to come out much later, but right now our education support workers are in talks with the government about their contract. And at one point they went on strike for a couple of days, and now they have a tentative agreement. But while they've been speaking about why they deserve more money, which I 100% agree with, they do. But the tagline that keeps coming up is, oh, these EAs are in the classrooms with these kids with disabilities, and they're being spat on and slapped and kicked and yada, 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 and that is why we deserve more money. And I don't think that a lot of these people have negative intentions, and I'm not even going to deny that. I am sure that they do get spat on and slapped and kicked and all these things, because you know what? I was the child who had disabilities, who hid under desks and kicked people and all of that stuff when I got completely overwhelmed, when nobody knew how to deal with what was going on and nobody knew how to communicate with me. But what ends up also happening is now the wider public is getting this reinforced stereotype that
Mm,
disabled children are violent, they're scary, they need to be essentially shoved in a corner and ignored, and they effectively just need to be babysat through school, instead of trying to actively educate them and actively see them as valued members of society. Um, and that then translates into other things like ODSP, just straight up ODS. People on ODSP only get $12,000 a year. And this is something that I pointed out in a video that I made, because the whole tagline for the strike was 39K is not enough. And I'm sitting here was like, if 39K is not enough, how is 12K enough? But it's just like the string of, well, we don't see them as human, and then they become adults and we still don't see them as human and don't see them as valuable, so they can live in legislative poverty. It's okay. um and this
just
is this is
go
where we
finish.
end up.
It's, you just said that, and it just gave me this, like, just put this image in my head where kind of going back to why we're in this space of inclusion and, um, having creative inclusive spaces. Okay. So one thing I always tell people, no child goes to school and says, I want to be a bad student. No child comes into this world and says, I want to be a bad child. And if there's a behavior issue or something, it's not like what's going on at home exactly, but it's like, hey, what's going on in our society and our environment. So I think a lot of time, again, people want to be quick to blame, it's the parents, it's this, it's that. It's our society. We have failed them. And so just as you said, like, put these kids and like, in a corner and like babysit them in the classroom and stuff like that. That's not what needs to be done. Some of them have things they want to say and communicate, but they may be nonverbal. They just don't know how to communicate. They're not, maybe the parents are not too sure how to get the support to help them to communicate. So it's just, it's just a struggle for everybody right now. But when you said that, here's here's a little bit of a history lesson. Okay, so once upon a time, we had like those asylums, those hospitals, where we would put people with disabilities. Family members would put their, if they had a family member that had a disability, whether they're mental or physical, they'll leave them on these institutions and the doorsteps and basically abandon them. And then it was discovered that these people were being treated inhumanely, where we had them like, they were injecting, different chemicals in them, or, how, I think
Literally
sometimes,
experimenting on them.
yeah, exactly, experimenting on them. Like we've seen these clips in like films and stuff like that, where these people were like, human experiments and not treated kindly at all. So now it's like, okay, well, how we're treating these people in these institutions is inhumane. So we close down these institutions. Now all the people that were,
Allegedly close down these institutions.
yeah,
That's a
now that we put them, now they're closed them, and now they're going to go out into society, but they spent all their time being ill-treated, and like locked up. Now it's like, how do we, they don't know how to communicate and integrate with other people in their environment, in their society. So then again, because, okay, now this is another issue we got to figure out. And then it was the same thing when it comes into the classroom, right? So you have students that, well, we can't, that are on different, everyone learns differently, okay? We have students that are on different abilities, are performing different ways, and we have some students that need a little bit of extra support. And it's like, now parents don't want to have their child be that stigma, be in like, a spec ed classroom, or, I even noticed that like there's different terminologies now for the special education teacher. You have a special education teacher, you have a resource room teacher, special education resource room teacher. Like I feel like there's all these different terminologies now.
a lot of that comes from people thinking that disability
Is
is a
a
dirty word, and
Yeah,
it's not. So
yeah,
like, it's when you get from being disabled to differently abled to,
yeah,
like all this stuff, and it's not. Disability is not. Special education is not a dirty word. Being disabled is not a dirty word. We don't need to sugarcoat it or change the language. But that's how you end up with, because I was a part of that generation where, like, I call it spec ed because that's how I grew up, but
Yep.
around grade 10 it got changed to the resource room and your
Yep.
resource teacher and blah
Yep.
blah blah. Yeah.
It's funny you say that because when I was thinking of a name for Special Compass, people were telling me like, "Oh, be careful of the word special," and I was like, "What?" And I remember thinking that too because at the same time, around the same time, I had an now ex. He would tell me I'm special. So like, how is it this word is supposed to be like something, I don't know, positive in one context, but in a different context, it's like, oh, you better be careful. We have these again, there's a connotation with it, right? Um, and I told people, I'm like, no, I want people to know that this is a special place. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing wrong with that we're special. I am targeting a particular audience for a reason. So the special is going to stay in it, the name. Um, it's, I think it's makes sense of what we're doing, so it's relevant. But I thought that was an interesting debate, and I feel like even with learning disabilities, right? A lot of the times, I feel like what's holding progress in this realm, let's call it, is debating on the name, debating on the word,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, okay, doesn't matter if you want to call it learning differences, learning disability, different type of learner, whatever. The student still needs help. Like, we can't like argue about it five many different ways. The person still needs help. So, you know, that we need to work on how we're going to help them. Um, so yeah, I think that's very, and I always say, like, it may sound cliche, but it's reality. Like, everything starts within the classroom. If you're not creating that space where these students could feel that they could reach a full potential, they're, that they could read and be whatever they want in this world, what makes you think that they're going to get to the end of the road with education and feel like they could do anything if
Yeah,
we're not supporting them? Yeah.
the best analogy I can give to kind of get people to understand is if you were to put a deaf child into a classroom. So around 2007, 2009, we had the Inclusion Act and we wanted kids to be in the classroom, and that's all well and good. But if you're going to put a deaf child, for example, in a classroom with zero supports, the teacher is going to teach exactly how they would normally teach, but now there's just a deaf child in their classroom, meaning that they're just speaking their lesson. Maybe they're writing a few things on the board. They have to do group work with other students, etc., etc. But nobody signs. They don't have maybe a hearing aid, whatever other tools they need. They don't have any supports. How could you expect that child to learn? That's exactly what is happening with learning disabilities and autism and all of those things. We have put kids into the classrooms but refuse to give them the supports to succeed. And
Exactly.
then when they don't succeed, they turn around
It's
and
their fault.
say, yeah, oh, look, see, because autistic kids are dumb, kids with ADHD are dumb, blah, blah, blah. And then they get stuck into locally developed and then so on and so forth.
It's right on. I always say, like, okay, when it comes to now we say we're being accessible, people feel like, okay, if we put a ramp at the entrance, we're being accessible. I'm like, just because you put a
oh my gosh, okay, I
don't like
my
wow.
I'm still very connected to my high school. I haven't obviously been in my high school in like 2 or 3 years just because of the whole COVID mess, but I walked past there the other day and they put in a wheelchair ramp. Okay. This is a school that was built in the 1950s. I know that school inside and out. There is not an elevator in that school. There is not anything. I actually even stopped a couple of students and asked them, I'm like, did they add an elevator to the school? They're like, no. So they literally put in a wheelchair ramp to look accessible. But a child that would go to that school wouldn't be able to get to the second floor. That's kind of how our entire education system is functioning right now.
I wouldn't even say education system. I would just say our society in general.
Amen.
Because even now that we're talking to have like Canada's on this mandate to be more accessible, right? And even in this project, they're talking about being accessible in particular domains. Okay, so we had like transportation, communication, customer service, information and technology, like public sectors, like were the 5 domains first. Guess what other 2 primary domains were left off the table, and now they're like, oh, now we need to consider them: healthcare and education. like what do you think? Like, people with disabilities don't get sick?
I mean, we get sick more than the average person, but
or like, why would you not think that it is? And someone probably out there thinking about like, okay, well, this is a lot and too much. And I wish for the well for everybody, but accidents happen. Okay, accidents happen. People get hurt and get injured. It's like, if you break your leg or something, you have to go to rehab. You get a cast, you go to rehab to kind of like help heal it. You got to think about it, that like, if we didn't have the rehab, then it wouldn't be there to help you. Mm-hmm. So people want to make it seem like we're, when we have these conversations about inclusive, we're just adding another thing on it. No. How about you stop acting like, have a reactive approach to it and be more proactive, so that in the event of anything that happens, and this is what people don't realize, like a lot of the strategies and a lot of interventions actually that we have today that were designed to help people with disabilities help the masses.
Amen.
Like text messaging was invented for people with hearing impairments and deaf. Video phone, right? All these different things. So if you stop coming at this from a reactive approach and coming out with a more proactive approach, like when you're just thinking about creating an event, like I want to create this event. How can I ensure that I'm being, I'm making things accessible to people? If it's your first event, no one's expecting you to be, boom, get it perfect, but darn it, read something on the internet. Like, you, in this day and age, like, you got to understand, like, what makes you think that, having something that is not like located in a convenient area is not going to be a problem for people. You don't know how people are communicating or commuting. Having things available in different kinds of format, like all these things, these simple ways of thinking are actually play a big part in how we create more inclusive spaces. I was even talking to somebody today about some of the projects that I submitted for programming, and I said to them, I'm like, a big part of the budget that that I put in this proposal is for transportation. I don't know who's coming, but I'm going to tell you this: if I'm doing a youth program, these youth don't have no car. So we got to be able to provide some kind of transportation, right? Even bringing a little bit of like refreshments, like it's all these things that people want to take for granted and assume that, because maybe they don't have any issues getting to, point B, from point A to point B, they assume that that's everyone's experience, and that's not everyone's experience. So that's just my little...
A lot of accessibility would actually help more than people with learning disabilities or disabilities in general, because the reality is our education system is highly flawed, in a sense that it is a factory system. It is designed to see if you can test well, and first of all, not everybody tests well, but that doesn't show your ability or your performance. Like, we are now starting to talk about, people are visual learners, auditory learners, kinesthetic learners, but like, each individual person learns a little bit differently. And if we started designing a system to actually meet students where they are and where they need to go, instead of test scores and all these kinds of things, this robotic, industrialized system, we'd get a lot further.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think that even globally, just looking at education system, like globally, if you look at the education system, I honestly think that there's little things you could take from each region or each country to kind of put together to make a better system. But one of the things I'm actually realizing is what you just touched on again, was that other I would say other regions and other cultures and places are recognizing that there's different types of learners, or not every student's going to be on the same trajectory, will want to pursue a career that requires them to go to university. So it's like they're trying to create not streams, but pathways in like high school and middle school, where it allows students to get a little bit of hands-on of everything. You get some technical skills, you get some scientific skills, you get some vocational skills, and it's just more of giving everybody a taste of everything. And then obviously, like, what sparks your interest, go for that, right? And I think that's something that's missing with us right now. I don't think there's enough. And I've also been in the classroom too, so I also see some of the challenges. And I just think that there needs to, it's not just throw more money into the classrooms. It's like just really a new design of thinking that needs to happen collectively in our society. Yeah.
I want to do like an outro or something.
So no, yeah, for sure. This has been a fantastic conversation. And I thank you so much for Danny for sharing your story. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of A Different Side of Learning. And we look forward to it. So next episode, definitely we're going to talk into dive deeper. Like, this is just only the surface. We're going to dive deeper. So stay tuned and catch us on our next episode. And you can follow us on Instagram at Special Compass Inc. Oh my gosh, at Special Compass Inc. And if you have any questions, or just, check us online, www.specialcompass.ca.
Links will be in the description, I promise.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Thanks.